Now it looks like, so we were going to give it a few minutes and we.
Welcome everyone. I'll give you just about a minute or two for everyone to get logged in. If you don't mind muting yourselves, that would be great out of respect for the speakers.
Sheldon, right? Yes. We don't. But look at the F.
All right, we will go ahead then and get started. And I'll let people in as they drift in. Oh, here comes one. So this session is recorded and slides will be available on our stopRED.org sometime next week, along with all the other past sessions. So if you've missed any, you can certainly join or view them there. So welcome to our Lunchtime Learning with Dr. Juanita Cleaver-Simmons. At the end of the session, please take 2 minutes to complete the survey. It is vital to our funding. Funds are made available for this project through the Missouri Department of Public Safety and the Missouri Juvenile Justice Advisory Group from funding provided by the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Simmons.
Good morning. Thank you, Liz. And good morning to everyone. Thanks so much for attending our African American History celebration. Although the national theme, as you can see posted here, is African Americans in the arts, today we thought that we would focus on the other segment of African American experience, simply because of what's going on in the country today. We are devoting our session today to Black Fathers Speak, Raising Sons During America's Racial Turmoil. And Dr. Summer Johnson will be our guest moderator. We've sent out their bios and photos, but I'll just do a brief introduction anyway. Dr. Summer is a clinical psychologist, and we are excited that she does specialize in the treatment of children and families, and she concentrates a lot on assessments. She is fortunately one of the many experts in the St. Louis County courts, and we are finding so much talent in our courts that we are just pulling on them. And so we're just excited that she's here. She has a doctorate in psychology, and she does work in student affairs as the church chairperson of the diversity chairperson of the Missouri Psychological Association. Read up on her. She's got a great background. We're excited also from the St. Louis County Courts to have Alphonso Ivy, who is a graduate of the University of Missouri St. Louis and a former veteran of the Navy. We know that he is an expert as family therapist, and he does work with, as I said, the courts of St. Louis. We're excited to have him here, and he's been Employee of the Year. Just read their backgrounds. We've got a slew of a gift for you today. Nakia Douglas. I am just excited that he's come in to share his time. We had his son, Zahir, here before, who is one of the statewide winners in the MLK speech contest. And you see him on commercials for one of the media stations. But anyway, this is Nakia Douglas, Executive Director of Transition Resource Action Center. I know him from years back. He's always worked in the community. He's been Executive Director of TRIO, where he worked at the University of North Texas. I knew him as one of the Associate Superintendents of a large school district and the inaugural principal of the Barack Obama Male Leadership Academy, one of the first public single-sex schools in America, and this one named for Obama. He did it from the ground up and went on to work on other levels. He has been an asset to our Dallas community and nationally now. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Dr. Summer Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Dr. Simmons shared, I'm Dr. Summer Johnson, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm also the single mother of a 12-year-old African-American male. I'm going to attempt today to provide you all with information from a clinical perspective, but it can be expected that because I am a mother, that I will also share personal information regarding my experience being his mother. In 2018, my son was 6 years old, and I took him to the movies. And on our way out of the theater, there was a big poster advertising the new upcoming Black Panther film, and it was showcasing the characters for the upcoming film. They were superimposed on top of Chadwick Boseman's larger character. And not being familiar with comics, my little boy was like looking at all the characters and saying, oh, that's the Black Panther, and that's the Black Panther, and that's the Black Panther. And I had to correct him and say, no, that's not just this big one is the Black Panther. But then my son pointed to the two white supporting actors on the poster, and he said, and these two probably have the most power. And my heart broke because my 6-year-old already had an awareness of society's elevation of whites versus their view of him. And in my attempts at home to nurture socio-emotional competence and to protect his positive self-regard, he was still within an environment, likely his school, that was hostile and denigrating of African Americans. For males in particular, responding to such challenges can be made even more difficult by the onslaught of a racially hostile and discriminating society, especially when they're not prepared for it. Within the education system, Black students are punished more frequently and more harshly for the same, mostly minor offenses than are white students. Black students comprise only 16% of the student population, but represent close to a third of school-related arrests. Once suspended, they are more likely to experience multiple suspensions, comprising 42% of students suspended multiple times. The school-to-prison pipeline starts within the classroom. A teacher's decision to refer students for punishment can mean they are pushed out of the classroom and much more likely to be introduced into the juvenile justice system. When parents send their children to school, the expectation is that the child will receive an education and not to potentially have that right removed from their child. The school-to-prison pipeline contributes to high arrest rates for youth of color. Students of color are 3.6 times more likely than white children to receive one or more out-of-school suspensions beginning as early as preschool. And this pattern continues K through 12, where students of color are 1.9 times more likely than white students to be expelled and without educational services, and 2.3 times more likely to be disciplined through involvement of school officers, such as a school-related arrest. Once expelled, students are less likely to complete high school and are 2 times more likely to be arrested while out of school. Within the year of expulsion, they are more likely to come into contact with the juvenile justice system. There's also the issue of mental illness, which is my area of expertise. Juvenile justice involvement leads to an overdiagnosis of mental health issues within African American males. They can be overpathologized and given diagnoses such as oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, when trauma, anxiety, and untreated ADHD might better account for the emotions and behaviors having been demonstrated. Black males are 32% less likely to receive psychiatric treatment than white males and more likely to be subjected to punitive school discipline policies, feeding the school-to-prison pipeline. The tendency to pathologize youth of color according to their mental health states leads to more incarceration. I went home this past weekend to Kansas City, and at our regular Sunday dinner, my family and I discussed the shooting that had occurred at the Chiefs rally. As we discussed the suspects of the shooting, I asked if they had ever released more information about them, and my aunt stated that no names would be released because the suspects were juveniles, but that she knew that they were African American juveniles because Governor Parson had referred to them as thugs. And that struck a nerve within me, and I had to take a moment to consider just how much the media, either purposely or inadvertently, perpetuates stereotypes to the public, and how that same public even votes in support of individuals who also perpetuate those same stereotypes. As a parent, I have to consider a myriad of ways in which to mitigate the possibility that my son will be labeled as a thug, and we will get into that discussion shortly. But in addition to race, we have to consider the intersectionality of gender, socioeconomic status, and other factors. I'm a middle-class single parent who purposely purchased my home within the state's most diverse school district, believing that it would help to reduce the likelihood of my son being labeled as a thug. And while there certainly are more children of color within the district, issues of race and implicit bias impacted my family's experience within the district as early as my son's kindergarten year. I mistakenly believed that our having a greater cultural mix and higher socioeconomic status would make us immune to a social system in which my son might demonstrate behaviors, emotions, and have an appearance even that would identify us as anything other than a safe, middle-class African-American family. Instead, from the very beginning, his teacher labeled him negatively, and I have had to teach him to have a double consciousness regarding who he believes himself to be and how society might view him. As parents of African-American males, there are various strategies used to help nurture a strong sense of self while battling this onslaught of a discriminating society. Joining me today are two gentlemen that have worked with youth professionally and also are and fathers of African-American males. Mr. Douglas and Mr. Ivy, I welcome you into a discussion. Mr. Douglas, I did decide that I would go alphabetically by last name, so you're up first. Could you tell us about what your experience has been as an African-American male and what you have attempted to instill within your children and the youth with which you have worked about this experience?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. If you didn't know, my name is Nakia Douglas, and I'm a Black male. And so not only is my experience lived, but it's also a professional and a part of my ministry as an educator. I'm a son of South Dallas. I grew up in Dallas in a single parent household. So a mother that believed in sacrifice, a mother that believed in a future, but more importantly, a mother who created a village that was intentional in regards to the development of my self-understanding and self-awareness, but more importantly, also the development of my mindset as I moved throughout the world and navigated the many challenges that I face. So much so, she sacrificed for my younger sister and I to attend private school from kindergarten through 8th grade. I bring that up because that was pivotal from the perspective that I didn't understand the educational opportunities I was receiving in comparison to my peers, most of whom were attending the local public schools and weren't having the same experiences. And while my experience was not perfect, even when she couldn't pay tuition, those teachers still saw something in me and provided those educational opportunities in spite of the financial challenges that we were facing. But then going home on weekends and then talking with my friends in the evenings, I started to take notice in regards to what I had access to, the people I had access to, the opportunities and experiences I had access to. And so that kind of began crafting a mentality within me that all kids should have this experience. Fast forward, going to Lincoln High School, I've been educated by some of the greatest professional educators who saw and more importantly, expected more from myself and my peers. I had opportunities to learn from Dr. Simmons within our humanities and world cultures courses and traveled the world. I literally traveling to Africa twice as a 16-year-old young man and also as an 18-year-old young man. That transformative experience not only reinvented me, but more importantly, it provided a deeper impression of who I am and whose I was. And so I took that into my career as I chose to become a professional educator. Again, the reflection of my own personal experiences when I became a classroom teacher, let alone a kindergarten teacher, I always prided myself in offering a private school education at a public school cost for my young people. I did that in North Carolina and then also transitioned back to Dallas, back to my own neighborhood of South Dallas, and provided again that public school education, private school education at a public school cost. Intentional in regards to finding additional resources, making sure that my students had experiences that their peers across the nation, whether they were in public school and or private school, were privy to ensure that in spite of whatever gaps, challenges, or struggles they were facing personally in their own lives, when they were in Mr. Douglas' classroom, they were going to be over-prepared to step out into the world. I took that same mentality even further when I became a campus administrator. I've been privileged to be an elementary, middle, high school, magnet school principal. And as such, there was an intentionality in regards to not only what I was going to provide, but more importantly, what I was going to provide through the educators, the teachers, and the support staff members that was there. So there was a shared accountability, a village, a better way to say it, that everyone understood not only the mission and vision for what we were doing, but more importantly, the purpose behind it. Whether it was in dual gender schools and all single gender campuses, there was an understanding that I was going to pour into those teachers so they could pour into those students. And so there was that intentional equipping of them for success so that ultimately our students could be successful. Beyond that, I've been privileged to lead this work across the school districts, serving as an executive director and teaching other principals and leaders how to have the same mentality and, more importantly, have success with their students and their communities. And then most recently, prior to my current position, I took the same mentality to higher ed and leading a trio of pre-collegiate programs at the University of North Texas at Dallas. The reason I say all of this is there's an intentionality in regards to our personal experiences that define who we are professionally. None of us have left the baggage that we grew up in. We just compartmentalize it. Our pain became our purpose. And in doing so, it has enlightened and, more importantly, equipped us to be where we are today. None of us are here by accident. None of us walked into this thing called life on our own. There were individuals that were intentional in regards to curating and cultivating who we were individually, ultimately to become who we are now as individuals. I look forward to this conversation and thank you all for this moment.
Thank you for what you shared, Mr. Douglas. Mr. Ivy, same question of you. What has been your experience as an African-American male, and what are you doing to raise young Black males who are shielded from society's discriminatory and almost predatory behaviors?
Hello, I'll say good afternoon at this point. Good afternoon, everyone. I think the way that I can cause the highest impact where people get something out of what I'm saying is maybe a little bit of mix of some empirical data along with the personal experience that you talked about, and just kind of look you directly in the eye and through this camera, and hopefully it pierces through to your soul. And so one of the things I think about is I went on a website of the National Urban League. One of the websites talked about that there is a 54% high school graduation rate amongst African Americans. And I live in a city currently with similar numbers. At one point, it was down to a 50% dropout rate, in fact. And so those are some really high numbers, but there's a lot of factors that are involved in those dropouts. A lot of times it may be resources, things going on in the family. It could be crime. It could be the community, all type of things. And so when you're in a position such as mine as a family therapist, as a licensed professional counselor, you want to do some things to help. But my ability to help is really based on who I am and where I've come from. And so I never forget where I've come from, because that's the journey that led me to becoming a counselor. When I got my license as a counselor, when I got that degree, the degree was really a supplementation. It was supplementing who I already was. Life trained me to be a counselor. I got the degree in addition to that. One of the first things I noticed, I'm from a little small town called Dyersburg, Tennessee. And in that town, I won't cry out race, because that shouldn't be the focal point. There are some things that occur when you're in certain environments that maybe affect you racially or come from a racial mindset, that it can throw you off course, and you may not be fully conscious of it. So basically, in my school, I'll never throw my school under the bus, because it was an excellent school, excellent people there, excellent city. But the thing was, I didn't realize that I didn't feel smart at that time. I didn't realize that I didn't feel enough at that time. It's almost like an effect of the ant on an ant farm. You don't know that you're on that farm because you're in it. That was what my life was. I was in a perfectly good school. highly ranked academically in the country. And yet I still didn't know that I felt less of myself, that I had less agency and less power. And to bear that point out, most of us, when I say most of us, I mean that there was a faction of Black people, was a predominantly white school. So let's just say if maybe there was 1,500 students or so, maybe 300 of those were Black. And so the issue that I had is by the time most of us got to middle school, high school, I'll say high school, by the time most of us got to 9th or 10th grade, we would have discussions amongst ourselves, and most of us believed and openly said we can't be the valedictorian because we haven't seen one. We just didn't believe that that was possible. And so the first time I actually believed it, that a light switch turned on, I actually moved to St. Louis to a predominantly Black high school. Now, academically speaking, this predominantly Black high school was ranked much less. It did not have all the resources. We still had typewriters at that time. There was a lot that was lacking. And yet I increased exponentially because who I began to believe that I was. I realized that there are only Black people. I realized that there was only African Americans there. And so I said, I too can become the valedictorian. And while I didn't become the valedictorian, I did graduate 4th in the class. So I did increase exponentially, but that was based on, I'm hearing my counselors say, you're really intelligent. You really work hard. I'm hearing my family members say that. I'm beginning to believe at that point, or have a little bit of faith in the fact that I'm intelligent. And that really changed who I was. And so I think belief and identity, self-image, is one of those major factors of how do we raise children. That's the mental part. That's the part that I can do as a counselor. And so, and I'll tell you another thing, as I have my own son, it's not a conversation that you think of having when you think of a fairy tale marriage and a fairy tale family. But my wife and I actually had a conversation as to how do we train up this son in this city, this North St. Louis, which is somewhat known for high crime rates. How do we train them up to have the right attitude, not to die? Those were the things that we were talking about in this city that is known as being dangerous. And so we literally had to come to a consensus as to, do we train them to be great fighters physically to protect themselves, or do we train them to have the highest attitude, the highest character, and the highest moral? We went with the latter option, and it's worked. Everyone is alive. Everyone is educated, and etc. And those are some of the keys, I think, to raising a son. And so if I had to maybe break a few down, I would say identity is one. Who a child believes that he or she is, it changes what their actions is afterwards. Even when I think about it from a cognitive behavioral perspective, the only thing we can really change is the belief about an incident. So we change the belief and maybe we change the outcome. So identity, who do I believe I am? Another thing would be education. Education is going to be important, whether we're talking of just standard academia or educating in specific areas, because of the statistic that I quoted at the beginning, which is currently 54% of African American men graduate from high school, compared to more than 75% of their peers. So education is very important. Economic standing, understanding, and ability, because half of the time that I see the young men here in detention and I ask them, well, why did you take the car? Why did you do the thing that you did? It's either one, I'm having fun. Two, I was with my community. There's a sense of belonging. Or three, we don't have anything, so I just take what I need. And so that begins to be a factor as well. So I said education, self-agency, and then I'll kind of tell on off, and so we can move on into the next portion. But self-agency, the ability is, in fact, it's another way of saying self-efficacy. It's the ability to, do you feel empowered to change your situation or your circumstance? Because when you do not feel empowered, there's a sense of hopelessness, and then your behavior begins to match that. And so I got a lot more. I got a desk full of papers, but maybe we can draw some of this out by allowing the moderator to ask these questions. So I'll pass it back to Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Ivy. Mr. Douglas, I'm wondering about your background and the fact that you have had the opportunity to deal with some adolescent males who maybe were without homes or maybe without direct contact with their families. And so I'm wondering, as someone who has worked with that population of children who are potentially even in foster care and without that familial support, in the absence of that support, what can we do as a community to ensure that these young men are prepared to be successful?
Thank you for that question. In the absence of that support, we have to create that support. What they say, we have to be the hope for ourselves. And so as a campus principal and also as a classroom teacher, I was intentional in regards to not only hearing from those young men and their families, but also being conscientious of what was happening in the community. So when we think about after school programs, most major cities are dealing with deficits where libraries, recreation centers, and resources that historically were available within our communities are no longer there. So there's an old saying, where there's an idle mind, the devil is busy. We have to engage our young people. We have to find experiences for them. And so where they didn't exist in the community, we created them at the school. We're going to get you involved in our chess program. We're going to get you involved in our Destination Imagination, Talented and Gifted, our athletic programs, our fine arts programs, allowing those young people to explore experiences they may not have outside of the home and or outside of the school was purposeful. Then beyond that, it was the relationships and the partnerships with local programs, the universities, and others that had an interest, not only just in the success of our school, but more importantly, success of each individual young person that attended our campuses. And so when we were able to capture them, we created new pathways of exploration from an academic perspective. I may have wanted to be a lawyer, but I couldn't be nothing I couldn't see. So therefore, we're putting them in front of them. And or these persons were volunteers, or we found out the gifts and strengths of the parents and engaged them. I've always been one of those, again, and that goes back to my own upbringing. My mom would rob Peter to pay Paul. And so in an instance as an educator, I would find ways to get people engaged in the life of our campus based off the needs of our campus, and specifically the students, in most instances, our young men. So creating what we want to see. I can't hear you.
My apologies. I appreciate you shared what you did, Mr. Douglas. Mr. Ivy, you have also had the opportunity to deal with a number of different populations of young men. And I really appreciated what you just shared because you were kind of speaking to the intersectionality that I was talking about, as far as there are different factors that we have to consider when we're raising young men. What level of education might they be able to obtain? What might they have access to? What is their current socioeconomic status? Who do they see themselves as being? Having that self-agency to maybe even see beyond what it is that their current circumstances are to help to elevate themselves. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, as a parent, what it is that parents can do to help to instill some of that sense of self-agency within their child, especially given that they are receiving all kinds of messages from the community that maybe there's someone that's not expected to do well.
Yes, thank you. I could use the cliche answer of you just have to love and support them. But what does that involve? Love and support. A part of love and support, I would say, is provision. Can I provide what's necessary for safety, basic needs? I think about, there's a term, I got it in one of my last classes of my degree a while back, but the term was called social determinants of health. And I always reference it. And it's just, these are factors other than medical that affect the community, and it affects mental health. And I'll rattle off a few. Things like can I provide safe housing, transportation, and safe neighborhood? If not, that's going to affect my actions, my behavior, my mentality. Can I protect a child from some level of racism, discrimination, and violence, or at least be able to explain or articulate to the child what is occurring, and that they have hope, that they have a plan? Education, job opportunities, and income. One thing in particular, and I'll just refer to myself with this, there was a lot of drug selling going on in the 90s. And so even the best kid with the most intelligent could find themselves selling drugs because of their peers. But one of the reasons that I chose not to do that was simply because my father showed me that there was other ways to make money. And I know that that sounds simple, but it really is a turn on. It's attractive to a child for your father to take you on a roof, fix a chimney, and you get $300 in a couple hours. That was a lot for 1991 or 1990 and being about 15 to 16 or whatever. And so all of these are social determinants of health. Is there clean water, polluted air? Is there access to nutritious food? Can we ever purchase the organic food? Or do we just have to get the very cheapest of the cheap? Language and literacy skills, that's a factor. And maybe I will conclude this question with an article that one of our other clinical psychologists, Dr. Brandy People, sent me, and it went perfectly with this, especially with me being both a clinical counselor and a pastor. So what she sent was, there was an article that was recent, and it says, the most recent findings published in the Journal of Religion and Health identified the relationship between religiosity and positive behavioral outcomes. In other words, staying connected with strong social support groups serves as a protective factor for these studied teenagers. And again, that's not necessarily saying that religion is going to be the answer for everyone. It's saying what is found in this religion, and it was the connectedness, it was the social support. So we give them options for those type of things, or they can choose to go with gangs or negative peer groups. And so I'll kind of stop right there.
Well, no, I think it's a great segue, because I know that you and I, with our offices being very near each other, and I'm sorry you were left out of this conversation, Mr. Douglas, have had the opportunity to discuss some of these issues. And so we have discussed, for instance, that yes, connectedness to some kind of peer group, some kind of positive peer group might help to ensure that our sons are successful. Like, for instance, I have considered my son being a part of a fraternal organization. I know that they have mentoring programs for young African-American men in the absence of a father figure. I thought that would be a good idea. And I also talked about how he's actually a member of the band, and how the band is actually considered to be pretty nerdy. He is a percussionist, so he plays one of the cool instruments. But kids are faced with a lot of different environments, like you said, Mr. Ivy, that they could potentially turn to. So how do we as parents help to ensure that our children choose the more, what we might consider the more positive environment, especially if they are within a living social environment around them, where they may have many community members who are stealing, who are ending up within the juvenile justice system?
I always would tell my parents that you're your child's first teacher. And in doing so, it was just that confirmation for them that their child's love, belief, and or disbelief in the power of education starts at home. And while we have the opportunity within the classrooms and in the schools to curate an experience for them, it begins there. And so when you think about it from a perspective as a parent myself of a middle school, 6th grade young man that is immersed in all of the ideologies and thoughts and the expectations of his peers that sometimes will try to creep up in alignment with what his mom and I think is best for him. We have those open and honest conversations. This is you. This is how we've raised you. This is what you have access to. This is your network. These are the expectations. And more importantly, this is what we're going to continue to support. Just that reminder that we see them, and beyond just seeing them, we hear them. And so just hearing his voice and hearing his opinions, having those open, honest conversations in regards to what is happening in society. Dr. Simmons spoke about my son winning the MLK oratorical contest. But when he finished, a lot of people were like, "Ooh, you did a great job on that speech." I said, "No, I didn't." And they said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Well, 90% of that is his own voice." I said, "My wife and I just kind of edited a little bit." And they said, "Where do you get that from?" I said, "We sit around and we talk. We have conversations about what society has in store for him. And more importantly, who he's going to be and who he's going to remain in spite of all the other noise." And so while as a teenager, he does hear the noise of his peers, he does see, what's happening in the media. We've been very, very intentional with him and his sister of understanding that we don't want them to be anybody but themselves. And so whether they're going to be engaged in athletics, academics, we want them to find their space. As they're looking at future careers, it's not what mommy and daddy would want, it's what you want for yourself and what you're willing to follow through with because you're passionate about it. They see and come to work with daddy. I've transitioned. My new role is executive director of the Transition Resource Action Center, where we support young people that are aging out of foster care, dealing with homelessness, and or have had contact with our criminal justice systems. I bring my kids here. They come and volunteer. They know the young men and young women that are here, and they develop an empathy in regards to being thankful for the blessings that they have for themselves, but ultimately also of understanding that service is a part of who we are as a family. And so that intentionality has in turn made them better students, made them more conscientious of who they are and their actions. And so I said all to say, it's a holistic experience that we have to provide. You can't do just the one-offs. We have to be intentional with the conversations, with the expectations, but more importantly, the environments that we're curating for our sons.
I think that's an amazing point, because so often I am seeing when I'm in therapy with families that there are parents who are not willing to create that space that you just mentioned, as far as being willing to listen to their child. And a child is going to go in the direction from which they receive the most support. So if the parent is not there to provide that support through listening and making that child feel validated and as though they are someone who is important and can contribute a lot to the world, then that child is going to instead turn to those people, maybe a gang, maybe a more negative group of peers that makes them feel as though, hey, I think I can make it in this way, even if it's different from what my parents have tried to instill within me. Mr. Ivy, do you have anything to add to what Mr. Douglas just shared or to this discussion?
Sure. I will say I concur with all that he said. And in addition, if I had to choose some things, it has to be a holistic approach. There are many things that could be done and maybe should be done. But if I were limited on what I could do and I had to choose something to cause a great impact, I'll go back to this identity thing. I'll go back to this sense of belonging thing, because regardless of whether the child is white, Black, Asian, the sense of belonging is a major factor. In my private practice, I had a young man who he's in one of the better high schools around here, $10,000 tuition and more. But he's drag racing down Highway 40. And I'm wondering, why do you do that when your parents have provided the world for you? But there's a sense of belonging. This is what my peers are doing. I have to belong. And so it will shift anything with that sense of belonging. In addition to that, or along that same thinking, when I think about a sense of belonging, it's almost like a method to apply the medicine that we have. For example, if there's a sense of belonging, that's where I'm going to receive my education. Like we wonder why our children ask the most complicated questions to their peers instead of the people who may actually be a little bit more intelligent than their peers. It's because that's where the sense of belonging is. I'm going to receive my prescription or my medication, my understanding, education from that group because I feel most loved. I feel like I belong the most. It puts me in the mind of my wife has been getting stuck for years at the doctor because she has small veins. And she tells them when she goes in there, I need a butterfly needle. Every nurse decides I can do it. And she's been stuck. In all of these years, I've seen 24 years of excess sticking. And all that shows me is it doesn't matter how much medicine, how much psychological understanding you have, what your ability is as an attorney. None of the medicine matters if you can't get it in the vein. So getting it in there is that sense of belonging and identity. They will listen to you, which is why one of the first things in a counseling session is to develop rapport. I can't do anything to provide help unless you trust me, believe me, and there's a sense of belonging. And so that's one of the greatest things. And I'll finish with this more on the article that I mentioned. It says that with these three groups of people, religiosity or a sense of belonging, there was 28% of that group who were highly religious and really active. But with the same group, it says participants in the highly religious group reported engaging in fewer thefts, assaults, and physical fights, as well as less alcohol and cannabis use relative to the other couple groups. And so the focus isn't on necessarily the religion, but again, the focus is back. I just want to drive home a sense of belonging and connectedness. It changes things.
It does, especially when you consider adolescence, where we are in a stage of development where they are becoming more autonomous, trying to discover who they are. They're going to go toward wherever it is that they feel like they belong because they feel like that's what helps to identify and establish who it is that they are and who they want to be. So creating a sense of belongingness is important within your family system and certainly within those healthier school and community systems for our children. I'm wondering, and I'm going to toss this back to you, Mr. Ivy, how do you think we might go about changing some of our various systems to help create a more level playing field for African-American males?
I think some of the same stuff that Mr. Douglas was talking about. There's diversion. There's other ways to add programs. I was just interviewed last night by the Urban League because they have a new program that they're attempting to launch nationwide, and it's called Save Our Sons. But this is what they're attempting to provide: a sense of community, some education, some economic empowerment, the ability to have some level of self-agency to change the situation. And so some of that is in providing community, connectedness, also exposure. You can't have a vision until there's some type of exposure that it exists. Again, piggybacking off something that Mr. Douglas said a little bit earlier. When I come to St. Louis, if the only thing that I know is North St. Louis, I have no vision. I was floored when I saw Wildwood because I hadn't been out of my own neighborhood. So now that I get vision, I can have different desires. I want a bigger house now. I don't want this one. I want a different education now. I don't want to go here. So exposure, and I'll say this, maybe this is jaw dropping to the people on the line, but I had another couple kids in private practice. These kids were 13. They had never gone to a movie theater. Some of that had to do with poverty, but some of it had to do with other ailments and disorders. Their mother was deaf, not deaf. And she didn't have any means financially, but it was also a little bit of a hassle to go to a theater. And, part of my treatment for those kids was just exposing them to the best of my ability to new things. That type of socialization, that type of acculturation that changes that sense of belongingness, which I'll keep driving home. So that's what I got.
And I don't know if it's a St. Louis thing. I can't speak to Dallas, and maybe you can, Mr. Douglas, but certainly I have also experienced times here in St. Louis where I have had clients or patients who have come to me and said that coming to see me is the farthest that they have actually ever been from their home, and how jaw-dropping that was for me to hear that the economic status of the city residents of St. Louis might be such that they don't even have the opportunity or even the desire, because they can't see beyond even just going beyond their city block for any kind of service. But Mr. Douglas, I'm also wondering from you, what do you feel like could be changed within the various systems that we have to create a more level playing field for African-American males?
One, policies. 2, a belief. And 3, just the acceptance. Policies, which will lead to additional funding and opportunities to recreate and/or curate experiences for our young men throughout our communities. 2, a belief that there is a future and a hope for them. And 3, an acceptance of who they are as individuals and us collectively as a race. When we think about, our juvenile justice systems and just our justice systems in general, our young boys, which you kind of mentioned earlier with the discussion from the mayor, that you knew that they were African-American when they labeled them as thugs. Why can't they be kids who had a disagreement and got into it with each other?
Mm-hmm.
If they were any other color, that would be what was happening. To take it even further, when you think about adults, historically, whenever there is an incident that happens, my wife and I won't say we joke about it, but we can always tell when it's African-American, Hispanic, and or a Caucasian alleged person. Because 9 times out of 10, if they don't release the names and the pictures, they don't look like us. But if there is an incident that happens and it's someone from our community, their names are released immediately. And so if you see me as a grown man that way, quite naturally, you're going to see our kids that way. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about, again, the change in policies, the belief and the acceptance, you have to accept us not only individually, but collectively. You have to accept us that we are entitled and are deserving of the same opportunities, if not more. And if you accept us, that means you believe in us. And so therefore, you're going to put policies and funding to ensure that we're successful and have a level playing field. We're not asking for equality, we're asking for equity. And in that equity that we're requesting, that lets us know you value us as a people because we're one race, and that's the human race.
Amen. There is a question in the chat from Dr. Simmons asking, what do you all feel is the most important thing for juvenile professionals to know about Black boys?
Well, that is a simple but complicated question because there's so much, but I would be wrong if I jump ship right now on what I've been saying the whole time, belongingness. So, but let me say it a little bit different way. So there's a theorist, Marsha Linehan, who came out with DBT, studied borderline personality disorder. But one of the things that she talked about was many of these disorders, that particular one, is because of chronic invalidation. If you're invalidated everywhere, at school, on the news? Why do I have to wake up and see the news? And they always say North St. Louis, but they don't say any other part of St. Louis. But we specifically say North St. Louis. We're going to bust that one on out, you know, but that's what I grew up with. And so if there's an invalidation in my school system, if there's an invalidation on my job, if there's an if it's chronic, it begins to turn into something that is belief. And now I'm internalizing this. My behaviors begin to, you know, even I move the other way. If the black guy is coming around, coming down the street, you know, I hide my white person because I'm internalizing it now. I'm no different than the 12-year-old.
Okay. We're still recording. I'll say one key word that's in the question is boys. They're not men, they're still developing. And so there have been some systems, persons that have failed them and or did not exist and or did not acknowledge them and accept them as to why they fell through the cracks. There's something that happens in a person's psyche when you're in survival mode. If I don't know where my next meal is, if I don't know where I'm gonna sleep that night, if I don't know if I'm going home to a safe environment, those traumatic experiences are going to cause me to react. They're going to cause me to be creative in finding a way for me to sleep, creative in finding a way for me to find a place to eat or how to eat. And so unfortunately, it may be that my friends or those in the community that are finding fast money in inappropriate ways become attracted to me because I'm in survival mode. If you accept me, if you believe in me, if you're willing to create policies and provide funding for me, that becomes my other avenue to not consider that in this traumatic situation, that there is a way out. Because if you haven't created a path for me to see for myself, I'm gonna create one for myself. And so if we can't be upset that the kids are burning down the village, because the village didn't do anything to help raise the kids.
I agree with you. I think that as a mother, my perspective is a little bit different. I did read an article in preparing for this discussion that looked specifically at Black mothers raising African-American males. And one of the things that Black mothers also worry about, and I would imagine fathers do too, is the appearance of their children. And I know that I had a conversation with Mr. Ivy a few weeks ago in which I said when my son was about 4 or 5 years old, I took him to get a pair of glasses. He's got 20/20 vision. But I said to myself, I want everyone to look at you and feel as though you are someone that is not at all threatening because you are just a boy. And we were coming off things like, you know, the Tamir Rice situation, you know, where there's a boy playing out in his yard with a toy gun and the police assumed the worst. And now Tamir is no longer with us. And I did not want something similar happening with my son. Of course, we don't use toy guns too much in my house, but still, I wanted him to feel as though when people looked at him, they knew that they were safe. They knew that they didn't have to assume anything negative could potentially occur. And so I'm sure that as fathers, those are things that you have also considered as far as like, you know, looking the part. And I don't know how much time we have for this discussion, but I did certainly want to, yes, Dr. Simmons, go ahead. Oh, okay. I have no idea what you said, but you held up 2 fingers. So so maybe you all could speak to that a little bit as far as maybe does appearance impact how young African-American males are perceived or how African-American males, period, are perceived?
I think it does. I mean, I don't want it to, but I think it does. If I go out in a van, I'm going to be fine, I think, most times. But I have worried. I've actually told my son who has locks in his hair, like you and your friends. I know that this sounds very racist, what I'm saying to you, but I think you guys can be targeted just based on what I have experienced myself. And so that's not the discussion that I want to be able to have with the young men. But yeah, I do think appearance sometimes it affects things. Otherwise, why would we have business classes talking about the first impression in the elevator speech? And it's an impression that's on somebody else. So yes, appearance does make a difference in my opinion.
Another real reality of it is that we have to have with our sons is, unfortunately, just by the color of your skin, it doesn't matter, how you're dressed. Just our posture and our existence in some spaces is threatening to others. So therefore, again, going back to that sense of self, that self-efficacy that we have to build and curate within them. We can't pass off all of our fears to them. It's best if we pass off our greatest hopes. And we can try to protect them from everything, but there's going to be a time where those training wheels are off and they have to go out into the world. And as they're entering into the world, do they have a sense of understanding that I'm Nakia Douglas? And while I may be the first African-American executive director of this organization, I'm supposed to be here. And in understanding that I'm supposed to be here, I'm going to come unapologetically as Nakia Douglas every day because this is who I was raised to be. And so as parents, it's in very intentional that we have to have these conversations because society is not going to change. For every person that looks like them, they may be against them. For every person that doesn't look like them, they may be their greatest advocates. But if they have a true sense of self, they're going to stand regardless and understand that the struggle makes you strong. You're being tested right now because another blessing is coming. And anything worth having in life is worth working for. And if it means that how you carry yourself, your demeanor, your confidence is intimidating to others, that's their problem, not yours.
Agreed. Am I intimidated or are you intimidated?
Right.
One of those. Within the chat, thank you for those of you who have added to the discussion. We have a comment from Carol Milan. I apologize if I've not pronounced your last name correctly, that there haven't been any programs for male juveniles in the communities. I'm not sure what you mean by that, what community you are within and how that might impact you, but, and I'm not sure if she's on the call, okay, look and see. Carol, if you're on the call, you're welcome to speak up to that. Or certainly Mr. Ivy and Mr. Douglas, if you want to speak to maybe limited or a lack of programs within the community and how that impacts African-American males.
Good afternoon. My issue has always been, I have worked with the family court system for several years. And when I would have a youth with delinquency, I could never find any mentors, programs for them to be involved with. And I have always been frustrated about that. Here I try and hook them up with resources, and there are no resources in the city of St. Louis. There may be now. I haven't been in delinquency for about 10 years. But it was very frustrating at that time.
Mr. Ivy, are you able to speak to that as far as resources that you know of that are available within the city or even the county?
Well, we definitely need to develop a stronger list of agencies. Sometimes the agencies, they come and they go, and the court itself can't go out and create agency. And so it really does put people in a bad situation. We need to be able to produce more mental health people, more people like Mr. Douglas who has agencies. And right now, we have, as a community, we have not set up the ease of restrictions and the platform to be able to give birth to some of these programs, and it puts more stress or strain on a person like me. I'm listed with the Voice of the People in Real News St. Louis as one of the top African-American counselors in this city in private practice. But the fact of the matter is, I can't see a kid in private practice if the kid is in court. So I can't be in two places at once. And while I'm helping the court, I've been extracted from the community. If I could duplicate myself, it would be great, but I can't. And so we need to produce more leaders who are willing to amplify voices and amplify the situations, educate, validate, and help them elevate. Not to be doing poetry.
Well, this is Miss Mallon again, and one of the things that I was very frustrated about was I could never find a mentor for my young men. I think that's a big part that we need to work on.
Yeah.
To your point, Miss Mallon, mentors can come in a variety of ways. It may be through a camp, Boy Scouts, the Boys and Girls Club. What I didn't tell you all that some may have picked up on, I grew up in a single parent household. So when I talk about this village, my mom was intentional in regards to the programs and services that I participated in across the city. She used to always tell us we may live in South Dallas, but South Dallas doesn't have to live in you. And so there were different men and women that exposed her and myself to programs. And so literally I would ride the bus across the city to go to the boys club, to learn how to swim at the Y, to try gymnastics at the YWCA. And so some of those indirect mentors that became personal mentors were through those extracurricular activities. And so while I would say there may be some mentor programs out there, sometimes it's through those other activities and persons that are in the lives of us as adults and also in the lives of our kids that you may find that validation and that like-mindedness to help your sons and other young men in the community see something more for themselves.
So, our time is up.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just saying, believe it or not, our time has come upon us, and this has been such a great discussion. And Dr. Johnson, you have done a phenomenal job. You have been the expert that we knew you would be. Mr. Douglas, Mr. Ivy, wonderful experiences. I respect you as professionals in your field and as fathers and community activists. We did have one comment that we will give some consideration to, and that was from Rick Gaines from the St. Louis courts. And he said that he would have appreciated having a white male also to show another perspective. And I think that that's a valid concern. And we will continue this discussion, hopefully at another time, and involve more, because we would like to hear. I have many friends who are working and who are working in juvenile positions from different ethnic backgrounds, and they are hardworking people, and they're concerned, and they will call and ask, what more can I do? And so we want to hear from those voices too. I know that Liz has put in the chat box the evaluation form, and we've got to have that to justify our existence here with our program. So we appreciate you downloading that and taking it. Also, what was shared was a link that they are thinking that you can further look at some information, and we appreciate that coming in. And so the only thing I could do, Nakia Clay, I think, who put that in there, was to take a screenshot. I mean, just to shoot it with my camera so that I can look it up later. We're 4 minutes over. Is there anything pressing? This has been so dynamic. I hate to stop it, and I'm so grateful for this participation. And of course, I'd like to know if there is any thing that we've missed or something that we need to look at. For those who wanted more on Black history background, that's on our blog right now, and it's open to discussion. And we encourage you all, as we post this recording, to have further discussions. If you want contact with our presenters, do let us know. Email me, text MJJA, because there's much more. And a special thank you for your attendance. Thanks to the Transition Resource Action Center, Family Court of St. Louis County, to Liz, Marcia, Jen, who's on the line from our Restorative Justice Division, which I'm sure she had a lot more that she could have actually talked about the work that we're doing through the state on restorative justice, and then to the entire MJJA staff. Without further ado, is there anything pressing? What have I missed, Liz? What have I missed, Mr. Douglas, Dr. Johnson, Mr. Ivy? Anyone?
I do have one final comment. I would say this, what I've seen mostly in the last 5 years, I know I talk about validate, and they're able to hear from you, to receive from you. But the next thing becomes, if I can't change their situation financially, educationally in that manner, then the next thing that I do is, the next best thing is teach distress tolerance skills. So the highest or the most in quantity of a treatment that I've provided over the last 5 years has been, I got to teach you to maintain until you have an opportunity to elevate. I don't want you to break before that. And so distress tolerance skills is key. And it's been nearly a part of every treatment that I've done that has involved the youth over the last 5 years. So
Good word. Good word. Close us out, Dr. Johnson. And Nakia, I see you shaking the head. Is there something? Oh, okay. Dr. Johnson, close us out.
Well, we'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We know that we feel like we've just kind of barely scratched the surface, and there's so much more that we could discuss regarding this topic. And so it's sounding like Dr. Simmons is thinking that at some point in the future, we will be able to continue this discussion and also add additional panelists. So any feedback that you all have, please be sure to provide it within the survey so that we can help to improve upon what it is that we have presented to you today, but also just as professionals, as you are dealing with young African-American men, remember that they are just young African-American men capable of the same kinds of mistakes and even good things that are possible within children of other races, and that you might also have, regardless of the color of your skin, your own biases that may make it so that you see children a certain way. And so we encourage you to look into what those biases might be, how they might impact the population that you're working with. And certainly if we can be of any assistance to you in helping to navigate that, please reach out. Thank you for joining us.